Hi, my name is Megan, and this is Everything Lit. Today, I am bringing you my February wrap-up. I read 13 books in February, and guess how many were library books? 7 of them were library books. Over half. That's insane. I need to chill. I need to read the books I actually own. But guess what? In February, so technically I bought 7, which is 2 more than my self-imposed limit. However, there was a deal at Barnes & Noble to get triple stamps. So I waited, I bought the 3 books that I wanted on triple stamp day, and technically I can count those as March, right? Those 2 extras, because it was the 29th. That's not a real day. It was March. I'm counting them as February. I did go over my limit, but I'm okay with that. It was a smart choice. Let's start with the reread. My first read of the month was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I am not going to talk too much about this because I have a whole reread vlog where I go in depth about my thoughts and feelings and different scenes in this book. But Station 11 is the story of a traveling symphony in a post-apocalyptic world. They travel through the ruins of Michigan, mostly, and perform Shakespeare plays and symphonies with their instruments. But it also follows this actor in the pre-pandemic world and his life and the people connected to him. And he is kind of the central character that all of this branches out from, even though in the very first chapter, he passes away on stage. I love this book. I think it's beautifully written. I think it's beautifully imagined. I think it's so empathetic and human and humanitarian, and just, it made me feel grateful to exist right now. And that is such a gift. Obviously, I gave this 5 stars. I adore it. Then I read Say You'll Be Mine by Naina Kumar, and this is a romance where we have our female main character going on her very first setup date by her parents. So our main characters are both Indian, and our male main character, his mom has set him up on a bunch of different meetings with women, and he's kind of agreed to do this for a year. And they decide to get fake engaged to get his mom off his case. And she, our main character, is obsessed with her ex-boyfriend or her best friend. It's a weird situation. They dated for a little while, but now they've just remained friends for a long time, and he just kind of treats her terribly. But he's getting married, and she needs a date to his wedding because she doesn't want to seem like the lonely, pathetic best friend hanger-on. Except then he invites her to be his best man. So she has to deal with best man duties for this guy that she's kind of in love with, and that is why she asks our male main character to be her date and pretend they're engaged. This was the perfect rom-com for me. It had the shenanigans, it had the silliness, it had things in both characters' lives that were going on outside of the romance, and then it meets the pretty woman rule because with the romance, they learn lessons about themselves and then apply it to the situations outside of the romance. It was phenomenal. I loved their banter, I loved their connection, and it is immediate that they have a connection in such a gorgeous way. I don't even know how to explain how the author did that, but she did it, and I ate it up. 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. And this was a debut, so I will be following this author's career and picking up other books by her because I loved this. I loved everything about it. I have no notes. And then I read a poetry collection called Duende by Tracy K. Smith. And this is a collection about the idea of duende, not only as a passion or your fire, but there are these mythical folklore creatures of Spain and Spanish-speaking countries called the duende, and these are little folk that come out and maybe clean your house or lure people away. They're kind of at the intersection of fairies and elves. I gave this collection 4 stars, but like looking back, because it was a library book, I can't think of any poems or lines that really stand out. I think I probably could bump it down to a 3-star and not be mad about it. Like that, I know there were poems I liked, but I didn't like make note of them or write any quotes down or anything. So like I liked them, but I didn't love them. I'm not a good poetry judge, you know? Like, don't take my poetry recommendations because I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to find what I like, and this was fine. I wasn't like blown away by it. And then I read Red String Theory by Lauren Kung Jessen. This is another romance, and it was really good. This is my first book by this author, but it's actually the author's second book. I bought her first one, still haven't read it. And this is about 2 characters who meet by fate or happenstance. So we have our male main character who works with NASA or works at NASA, and he doesn't really believe in fate. He believes in math and logic. Then we have our female main character who is an artist, and she believes in the red string of fate, which is a Chinese folklore myth where you and your soulmate are tied together by a red string of fate, and slowly that string draws you together until you meet. And their banter in this was top tier. So he lives in California and she's in New York. He's in New York for a conference. They meet. He sees one of her art installations, and then they spend this magical night together. Like they end up at the same party, and they have their banter, and they like go to different restaurants and kind of explore the city at night. And then he goes back to California, and they, will they meet? And they do. They end up meeting again. And like, it's just so good. Like the tension was good. The will they, won't they, like, will they get together? Is this what's right for them? I cannot emphasize how good the banter was in this. I think their dynamic was just so fun. And my critiques, I do have a couple critiques. I think the story overall went on a little long, and I think that opening scene with them together, well, it's not the opening scene, but that like night that has to build up so much of the relationship and make us want to invest in them, it was done really well. But again, it went on a little too long. Like literally, it felt like the first 150 pages were set up and like that night. And that's a lot. It's like a 400-page book. So I gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Mary Shelley Club by Goldie Moldavsky. This was fantastic. This is a YA like thriller horror story, and our main character at the very beginning, her house gets broken into, she gets like thrown to the floor, and then suddenly we're like a year later. We know obviously that she survived, but we kind of figure out what happened that night because she has to transfer schools, and she transfers to this new school and meets a group of weird kids who really love horror movies, just like our main character. She loves horror movies. This is such a fun send up of like slashers, not even slashers, but just like horror movies in general and the horror genre with the tropes. It was just fun. It was a fun YA thriller. It had tension, it had mystery, it had reveals. It really kept me guessing on like who was the villain, who was the bad guy, and it also had me rooting for 2 different guys. Like it's kind of a love triangle, but not really. Like one of the guys never really shows interest in her, but you're still like low-key rooting for it. It was just fantastic. I love Goldie Moldavsky. I'm working on a fangirls guide video for her. I got one more book to read and then I can get it together. But this was really fun, kept me guessing, kept me engaged, and I gave it 5 stars. And then I read This Coven Won't Break by Isabel Sterling. This is the sequel to These Witches Don't Burn, and it is a duology, so it's over. This second book was so phenomenal. It was high stakes. It was tense. Something happens at the end of the first book that I think it could be really easy to lose sight of that emotional thing that happens at the end of the first book. But no, our character was dealing with the emotions from that and the fallout from that like the whole time, and it was complicated and human. It's YA, like fantasy. It defied the easy, good, bad, right, wrong. There was so much depth to this story. The first book, we follow our main character as she is breaking up with a girl who is in her coven. They are witches. She's an elemental witch, and she's at a school bonfire, and someone does some kind of ritual. They stumble upon this ritual, and they don't really know why this ritual is done, what the purpose of it was, who did it. And so in that first book, she's trying to solve the mystery of who did this ritual, and then she and her family and her ex are getting threatened by this mysterious force. She thinks maybe it's a blood witch that she had to deal with in New York. Well, she's also meeting like a new girl, so it is sapphic. I am surprised by how much I loved this story, and not because I expected it to be bad necessarily, but I expected it to be your normal, light, YA, kind of, just bopping around. I'm having a good time. No, this had impact. This had depth. This had good characters to root for. And I think what really drew me in is the stakes. In the first book and the second book, the stakes are so high and they keep escalating. Things keep going wrong or keep, being revealed, and the stakes, like the danger, oh my God. Sequel, 5 stars, absolutely. So then I read Game On by Ceresia Glass. This is a romance, and it is about a woman who is a gamer, and she's trying to affect change, and she makes this video about a really popular game, calling it out for its poor depiction of women, and it has this like secret unlockable storyline with a Black woman who like gets murdered, and it's just, it's a small moment in the video game, but she really calls the company out, and the CEO of this company sees her video, sees all the fallout on Twitter, and decides that's horrible. We should change that. We should update that. And he meets her and basically offers her a job to help not only fix the issue with this game, but with future games that are coming out, and kind of like consult for diversity and inclusion in their games. Of course, they have chemistry, they like each other, and this book was okay. I read Ceresia Glass's first book and I really loved it. I loved it more than I thought I would, because it was friends to lovers, and I was like, no, this is almost enemies to lovers, but they're not enemies for very long. And they were adults, so they like talked through a lot of their issues or emotional things that happened. And then it's kind of a workplace romance, except it's a non-traditional workplace, because a lot of the time they just work at his house because he's the CEO and he has this amazing office, and they work on video games, so they're playing video games together. And there were not a lot of stakes in this book. There was not a lot of tension, and both characters were very concerned about how it would look if they started dating while working on these games together, and kind of the media optics of their relationship. So like the stakes were very much outside of them. The stakes were not emotional. They were both into each other. They both got along. They both got along with each other's families. So like I was rooting for them. I liked them together. But in the end, it was just like, okay, there was no high tension, high drama. We did have a third act conflict. It made sense why the characters were so upset and why that third act conflict happened, but it was still just meh. Like the whole story just kind of went along, and it was cute, but they were just like fighting I think it was trying to be pining, but it wasn't pining because they both knew they were into each other, but they just could not. So maybe it was trying to give forbidden romance, but the only reason it was forbidden was because of societal standards and like employee relationships. But she was like a contractor. It's not even like she worked directly for him. It was just like it just didn't work. Like it was good. It was decent. But for me, it didn't work. So I gave it 3 stars. I do want to keep an eye on this author and their more contemporary romances, because I've seen their Goodreads, and they do seem to write a lot of paranormal romances as well. If you hear a little purring, it's this boy. Then I read Interesting Facts About Space by Emily R. Austin, and this is a very similar character to her book, Everybody in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. She's very strange. She has a lot of issues. When we meet her in the book, she has an extreme phobia of bald men, and it is affecting her life. One of her neighbors is bald, and she's terrified of him. She doesn't like going home. She is really struggling with something, and her mother is depressive. And so she's struggling with that relationship, and she's struggling with like how to be friends with people, how to make friends. So then our main character also just dates around a lot. She sleeps with a lot of women, and one day she gets a call, and this woman is like, "Did you sleep with my wife?" And they kind of strike up a friendship. And this book was really, I don't want to say quiet, but it's written in these like vignettes that over time build up into this whole story. I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting style. It's an interesting way to write. And I think you have to have a lot of skill to make all of those pieces add up into, an emotional catharsis or a feeling. I was just rooting for this character. She kind of thinks that she has this like little bug inside her that is controlling her sometimes when she is like bad or mean, and this bug is just like her true self. And I think the way that the relationships in this book are built are well done and complicated, and by the end of the book I was really rooting for this main character. I just really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, and I was rooting for the romance too. There is a romance in this, and I was here for it. I think one of the most interesting things about Emily R. Austin's stories, I feel like as an author, she's really good at getting you in the character's head, but also kind of showing you how the other characters feel about that character by their reactions and by the way that they treat them. Like the people in this world, in the worlds that she builds, are kind, and they don't treat the main character like the weirdo that she tends to think she is. So then I read 3 books for the Cliterature Readathon. These are all romances, and I'm going to talk through them quickly because I, again, have a whole vlog dedicated to reading these, so I will link that below. Let's start with what I read first. I read I'm So Not Over You by Kosoko Jackson, and this was not good. This is a second chance romance where Hudson reaches out to our main character, Kian. I remember their names because I was mad about this book. They go to dinner after they've been broken up for like a couple months, and Hudson tells Kian, "Hey, I want you to pretend we're still dating for a dinner with my parents because they liked you and I don't want to disappoint them." And Kian agrees to this, and at the dinner, Kian gets invited to a wedding. So then they have to continue fake dating for this wedding in Georgia for Hudson's family. Where do I start? This was shallow. It was not well built. There were no stakes. We never learn why they broke up. It was just not a good time at all. I was not rooting for their romance, and some of it just didn't make sense. In my vlog, I literally wrote an alternate, I didn't write it, but I came up with an alternate way that the plot could go that would be more dramatic, more interesting, more complicated. Like, there was no complication here. And we just learn that Hudson is hot and rich, and I just feel like we didn't learn much else about him. I didn't want them to be together. After you've broken up and gotten together and broken up and gotten together 2 times, I'm not rooting for it. A 3rd time? Come on. So I gave this 2 stars, and I decided that I will not be picking up anything else by Kosoko Jackson. And if I do, if something really, really, really appeals to me, I'll get it from the library. Then I read Raiders of the Lost Heart by Jo Segura. This is an adventure romance. Our main character gets invited to this dig in Mexico, and it's related to one of her like ancestors. So she's really excited to go, and then she finds out that actually her nemesis is heading the dig, and they went to grad school together. they're kind of rivals. So we get a rivals to lovers romance. And they are both dealing with adult issues. Like, she is dealing with her image and her career and being like sexualized as a woman in archaeology, and he's dealing with an aging parent and grief over a parent who passed away. And I did like the story. I liked the plot. I liked the archaeology part. Their romance was okay. I liked a lot of their banter, but especially in the beginning, a lot of his thoughts are very shallow, very like it wants to be pining, right? It wants to be, oh, he thought of her and he thinks she's so brilliant and he has liked her for so long, but it kind of came across as like, damn girl, look at those tits, you know? So I liked a lot of it, but I had a couple issues. Overall, I gave it 4 stars. The last book I read for that readathon was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, and I've had this on my reading list on my TBR for so long, and then I didn't like it. This is about our main character, Stella. She hires a male escort to teach her how to be intimate and how to, enjoy sex and be in a relationship. And things just spiral very quickly into her paying him to be a fake boyfriend, and they meet each other's families very fast, and it was just too fast. I wanted fun, funny rom-com, like learning about each other through sex, and what I got was immediate chemistry, immediate like solutions, immediate wanting to date for real. And then we had this kind of alpha boyfriend protectiveness over her that kind of infantilized her, and I was just not into their dynamic. I was not into the vibes. I did not like it. I gave it a 2.5 stars, rounded up to 3, because I think the representation is important, but like, this was not for me. And then we ended on a high note with 2 books. So I read Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands by Heather Fawcett, and I really enjoyed this. This is a fantasy / cozy fantasy, and this is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. We follow Emily and Wendell on another adventure. So Wendell, can I spoil that? No, that's a spoiler. But in the first book, Emily is going to a kind of Nordic country to study fairies, and this time she goes to the Swiss Alps to study fairies, and Wendell comes along, and we have a couple new characters, and I think that the dynamics were fun. I think it was really good to introduce those other characters for Emily and Wendell to play off of, because just the 2 of them together, that was the first book, so we wouldn't have anything new. So now we had some new information. The stakes were high. The water's rough. This love is ours. How many times am I going to quote that in a wrap up? I'm learning about myself. I like a book with high stakes. If something is really low stakes, then it has to work a little harder to keep me. And not that I'm bored, because I'm not bored when something is low stakes. I just don't see the point. Like, why are the characters doing what they're doing? So it comes down to stakes and motivation, I think. And boy, did Emily Wilde have stakes and motivation. She is very scholarly. She is always doing it for the research. And I loved the way the story progressed. I loved the different mysteries. So we're working on solving a couple different mysteries, a couple different things going on, which I think really does keep the plot going, keeps our characters growing, keeps things moving forward. My only issue would be that this felt a little long. It felt like there was a lot going on. And even though we did get satisfying conclusions and satisfying answers to the questions, it took a while to get there. And part of that could be me. I did read it really slowly during the readathon while I was reading all 3 of these. I was also reading like 10 to 20 minutes of Emily Wilde in the background. So that could totally be me. But I gave it 4 stars, and I can't wait to continue on with this series. And then the last book that I read in the month of February was phenomenal. Like, this is my personality now. I read The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. This is a historical fiction fantasy set in World War I, which this single-handedly reignited my obsession with World War I. So this is about Laura and her brother Freddie, and he is a soldier in World War I, and she is a nurse, and they get separated. She goes back to Canada injured, and one day she gets a case of his things and his jacket and his tags. They're saying that he's dead, but that doesn't feel right to her. She thinks he's still alive. There are mysterious notes. She's getting mysterious indications that he is still alive. So she decides to go back to the war, back to the front in Belgium/France, and try to find her brother while also working in a hospital. And then we also follow Freddie's point of view as he wakes up in a overturned pillbox in the dark. He and a German soldier are trapped together. The way this book enthralled me, the writing is like, I can't even talk about it. I love it so much. Laura is headstrong and determined and alone. The book starts with a pretty terrible thing happening, and throughout the book Laura is like haunted by this ghost, and we also have Freddie like haunted by a ghost. And then in order to save the German, like Freddie does this thing, and we have this mysterious rumor about a hotelier who appears on the front, and like men spend one night in the hotel drinking his wine, and then they always pine to be back there. And there were just so many good mysteries and such a human element, and the horrors of World War I, and the heaviness and the terror and the unknown, and the idea of one world ending as another is beginning. It's like World War I really was, and really felt like to these people, the end of the world. And in a way, it was the end of an era. After this, we had factories and steam-powered things, and now we had the weapons revolution, I guess we'd call it. People experimenting with gases and bombs and just horrific things. And I think the horror and the devastation of World War I kind of gets lost in the horror and devastation of World War II, especially the further we get from these events. As the people who experienced them are gone, the human element, the human horror of it disappears, if that makes sense. So like there are still people alive who were alive during World War II, and so we kind of get the human horror and awfulness of World War II is more present, I think, personally. But World War I was just as savage. I mean, you can't really compare horrific events because they're horrific for different reasons, but the way that the mysteries in this book kept me reading, the idea of ghosts and being haunted, and there was a lot of religious imagery in here, and I could just read this again. When I finished it, I just kind of sat there. And I kind of wanted to read it again, like right away. But I couldn't do that. Because I need to read other books. I mean, it's only February, and this is a contender for my favorite book of the year. I gave it 5 stars, obviously, and I loved it. I did read this in kind of a fractured way because, again, during the readathon, while I was reading these 3 books, I was reading this in like 10-minute spurts, and I kind of wish that I had been able to sit down and read it in like half an hour, 40-minute, just sit down and sink into it. So 5 stars, phenomenal. The last thing I want to talk about, I read a fantasy. I read Emily Wilde. For books bought in 2022, I ended up reading I'm So Not Over You, because I did buy this in 2022. And then I did not get to My Dark Vanessa for the Goodreads or YouTube rec. However, I did read it in March, spoiler alert, so I will be talking about that in my March wrap-up. So thank you for watching. If you liked this video, you could click that like button. You could subscribe to me, but really, you can do whatever you want, and I'll see you next time.